Welcome to the 355 Seattle meeting of Maintainers Anonymous. If this is your first time at a support group, I will introduce myself, you'll repeat back, and then I'll do my share. My share will be about 25 minutes. Unfortunately, it will not leave time for anybody else to share. But later tonight, I'm sure you can find a random victim at dinner time and vent how awful open source is to you. And so, hi, I'm Eran. It's been 8 years, 2 months, and 12 days since my last open source free existence. I am a maintainer of a node.js web framework called Happy. I started Happy when I was working at Yahoo in 2011. I took it with me when I went to work for Walmart Labs, and then when I left Walmart Labs, I took it with me again. And now I'm basically, people asking what I do, I'm semi-retired. I do part-time contract work, and then I do part-time open source maintenance, and I'm trying to find ways to turn my open source into a business, and this talk is part of that adventure. When you're an open source maintainer, you get a lot of the need to please people, which kind of turns into a lot of entitlement, which turns into rage. And it's a pretty kind of terrible, terrifying things to do. And as you're working on it and you're seeing the kind of companies that are using your code, and kind of like in the beginning you're very proud and excited, and then you start feeling like, wait a minute, like all these Fortune 500 companies are using my code, and I am getting nothing out of it? There we go. Now we're in a meeting room. So how did we get to this situation where there is all these negative feelings around open source? So let's kind of try to break it down. So open source is fueled largely by aspirations. You start usually because it's fun. You want to write some code, you want to hack on something, maybe you want to learn something new, and you learn it by experimenting and building a tool. Maybe you have a need and you're trying to solve a problem. The problem might be a work problem, so you're actually getting paid to do it. You might have created a great package at work that is proprietary code, and either you want to get some public recognition for what you've done, or you're planning on leaving and you want to take it with you, so you convince your employer to open source it, liberate the code. You might be doing it for reputation. It's a great way of getting attention if you're new in the industry and you're trying to get some resume items, you're trying to get some attention of influential people to get hired. That's a good way of doing it. And there's also people who do it for ideology, and actually the original people who worked in open source were all doing it out of very strong ideology of free the code and basically move away from the enterprise proprietary code setup. So their motivation was less about the specific problem they're trying to solve and more about solving problems in the open and in a collaborative, free way. But that's, at some point, if you are one of the very few whose open source project become very successful, you end up with kind of like these two thoughts. It's like, one, I'm enjoying this and I'm creating a lot of value and it's fun. Two, everybody around me seems to be making a lot of money off this thing, except for me. And you're like, okay, I should be able to connect those two, right? So let's look at how can we find open source work. So typically, you start by asking for sponsorships. It's the easiest way. There are more and more tools now allowing us to, buy coffee for a maintainer, saying things. Companies can give a little bit more money. You can do paid support. In my case, I'm trying to fund my open source work, but basically selling commercial licenses for extra tools and by selling support plans where I can give you better help, advanced security identification. As of today, after doing this, I launched the products in March, and I'm making something in the order of $70,000 a year now from support licenses. And I'm going to be quoting numbers, and I'm personally don't think the numbers are great, but at the same time, for some people, the number might sound amazing. So like, I'm not bragging or anything. I just really want to give you an idea of kind of where I stand with my experiment, and to see if that either correlates to yours, or if it's something that you might want to look into for yourself, or maybe it's not worth your time. You can do contract work. By being a successful maintainer, you get the attention. People can hire you to integrate your product into their proprietary environment and so on. You can license extra features. So you can say, hey, the core is free. If you want these extra features, you have to pay for them. You can do what MySQL database has perfected a decade ago. You can do a community edition and an enterprise edition. And basically, the community edition is published every 3 months, and the enterprise edition is published every week. And so the free stuff every 3 months is the same as the paid stuff. But if you want to get the latest fixes and updates and security patches, then you have to pay them. If you're OK being up to 3 months behind, then it's free. You can do training, whether it's online or corporate workshops. You can sell merchandise. This T-shirt is available on the Happy Threadless store. If you have a logo, if you have enough audience, the Happy Threadless store makes about $150 a month profit from selling overpriced T-shirts and stickers. If you have a successful website, you can monetize it. Some of the popular front-end frameworks have extremely successful websites, and they make quite a lot of money selling ads. And also do affiliates program, where basically people come to them and say, hey, I have a workshop training on your framework. You promote my workshop, and I'll give you a cut from anybody who sign up to the workshop through your site. Very typical Web 1.0 monetizing of content. I did a calculation. Happy.dev does not have ads right now, but based on the traffic we get today, that's about $500 a month on a typical open source ad network. And you can also get money from some of the new, more innovative / sketchy third-party support companies, where they go and they sell enterprise companies a support plan, and then they sell insurance, an open source insurance policy, and then to insure themselves, they go to the maintainer and say, hey, I'll give you some money, and then if our customers have a problem, we'll come to you, and you have to promise us to help us fix it. So it's kind of like trading derivatives, only with open source liability. One of those companies is called Tidelift. I'm not particularly fond of the model, but it's new, and they're trying something different. I went to their website, and I put in all my 70 open source modules the other day, and if I sign up with them, I can get about $10,000 a year fees from them based on what I have today. The problem with most of these options is that they're not really exclusive to the maintainer who created the package. I mean, most of the ideas I just told you, you can create a website to give training for Happy, and you can monetize it the same way I can. And if you build better content, which you have a good chance of doing, because I'm not a great teacher. That is not my skill. I'm good at writing code. So all these other ideas are basically ways to make money off open source by not doing open source. And it's much easier to make money on the back of open source maintainers than being one, because actually the maintenance part is the most expensive part. So if you limited the cost of creating the framework, and you just monetize around it, hey, look, that's a winning business. So let's talk about sponsorship. Basically, what I've learned is that you get 1 year of pity. That's it. So you go online, and your open source module is successful, and people are using it, and you realize, like, OK, I can't do this anymore. It's taking too much of my time. I don't see my kids anymore. I skip vacation. My boss is yelling at me. I'm not sleeping. Something has to give. I need money to fix it. So you go on Twitter, and you say, hey, give me money. And some people are doing it more politely. They put little links and hints and stuff like that. Some people put big, flashing, yellow npm install banners. I'm poor, I'm going to prison soon, I have no job, help. Since January 2017, when I started collecting sponsorships, initially through Patreon, then through direct payments from companies, and now I'm using a little bit of GitHub sponsors, I've collected $164,000, so that's a little under 3 years. More than half of that money was in the first year. So like I said, you get 1 year of pity, and after that, people assume, it's fine, we solved it, and they move on. Sponsorship is a great way of extra cash, but it's the most unsustainable, inconsistent way of getting support. And just to get an idea, $120,000 came through Patreon. That's my net payment from Patreon. Patreon took $6,500 in fees, and the credit card company took $2,500 in fees. So $9,000 went in fees of the money that people gave me to support my work, which is not great. And then about $35,000 in direct deposits. So it kind of makes you feel like this is not fair. There's a fundamental fairness problem here. And the fairness problem, it's not just that the maintainers are not compensated, but also that the maintainers, the lead maintainers who get the money, are not really the one doing all the work. You have the downstream maintainers, you have the people who are creating all the dependencies. I don't have that problem because I can't stand anyone else's code, so I don't use anybody else's code. So all my stuff is only using my stuff. So I can only fight with myself, and I do that frequently. But it's very common. You're installing React, you're installing a lot of other people's work. The React itself is well maintained, well supported by Facebook, but a lot of the ecosystem is not. And nobody gets properly even recognized for their contribution to that ecosystem, because almost nobody looks at downstream dependencies, especially the 5th level down, unless, of course, it's left pad, and everybody's build breaks in the morning, and then you all notice all of a sudden that there's this thing called left pad. And there's also, like I said, there's this back of the head feeling of like, everybody's making money from my work except for me. And if you pay attention, a few months ago, Feroz was doing an experiment called funding. He basically had this idea, and he was trying to solve this exact problem of downstream dependencies. You put an ad on your NPM install, he collects the money from the ad providers, and then the money gets distributed not just to you, but to all the dependencies you have in your package. So kind of trying to be fair to the whole ecosystem. Didn't work very well because people don't like being reminded that there's a human cost to their pleasure. Didn't work really well because people didn't like all the noise in NPM install. And also, lately, everybody assumed it works because somebody did it. So one module put an NPM install script saying, hey, we have an open collective, give us money. And then other people saw it and were like, why are we not doing it? They must be making money, right? So we should do it. So a lot of people start doing it. Nobody's making money that way. I can tell you, nobody ever said, this is so annoying, I'm going to go give them money. So all this I started thinking about it, and I was like, what if we can do something like, there's fair trade coffee, right? What if we can do fair trade open source, some kind of like philosophy certification system? So you know how like in the end of movies, they say no animals were harmed in the making of this movie? What if we can do no maintainers were harmed in the making of this open source? That would be cool. So how do we actually quantify this concept? So I had some conversation with people, and I was like, how about if we ask maintainers to put in one number in their package.json file? So we set sustainability index, and you put a number from 0 to 100. And it's vague. It's like loosely, what percentage of your work you think is probably compensated? What percentage of your work you think is sustainable? If you have a full-time job and your employer is paying, put 100. It's sustainable. Somebody is paying you market value for your work. If you're doing it at home at night and you're barely making it, put 0. You decide what to put in. All the dependencies you have will do the same thing, and then you can create a website. You go to this website, and you put in the name of the package, and it basically does an average of all those scores all the way down and gives you a number, and then we can borrow from climate change solution and say, you're using this module has a 80% sustainability score, you want to feel better about yourself, you want only to use 100% sustainable thing, so you'll buy carbon offsets. So you'll say, you'll put in, okay, I'm using it to generate the $2 billion of profits. The system will do some calculations, say, okay, give us $1,000 bucks, and we'll spread it out to the people who need it most between the dependencies. So I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. But here's the thing. When I left Walmart and I maintained Happy on my own, there was a moment where I realized I'm not doing a good job because I don't have the time and resources to keep it up at the same level as I was doing before. So how to fix that? So I went and wrote a blog post saying, Happy is probably not maintained at the level you expect it to be. You might still think, Walmart is paying for this stuff, it's great. But in practice, it's not, and it was pretty stale at that point. There was a couple hundred open issues across the ecosystem. It wasn't anywhere near my standards, and definitely not the standards of the companies who were relying on it up until that point. So I wrote a blog post and I said, hey, look, this is what's going on right now, and the only options are, if I get more resources, it will get done, and if I don't, then this is the status quo now. This is just the reality of this situation. So some companies stepped up and started supporting. Most people just ignored it. But a few companies actually stopped using it. In their mind, it was better to abandon this project completely and use something else there's no empirical evidence that was better maintained than my poorly maintained, because even when something I do is poorly maintained, it's still pretty good. So it's like I have my standards, like I said, and then there's your standards. So, but that's the impression they got. And here's the thing. Companies are so reliant on open source these days. You cannot be a technology company, really any business today that has any kind of technological footprint, and not rely on open source. And the reality is that nobody is really paying any attention to the open source they're using. Yes, open source in the long run is going to be more secure and more bug-free than anything else. But in the short run, in that 1 week when I decided to publish a new major release of my framework, how many people do you think scanned that code, reviewed it, really looked for backdoor, that I'm not trying to basically cash out on 8 years of work by screwing all the company using it, stealing all the user data and moving to Russia? You don't know that I'm not planning that. I almost did it with QS. I somehow was maintainer of the QS module that I didn't write. I had the rights on NPM, and I was in a fight with the request people to remove my dependencies from their stuff. And I basically made a public thread that if you don't remove my module as a dependency to request within 30 days, I'm going to shut down QS on NPM. I won. They backed out. But denial is the core principle of open source in corporate environment. Companies need to feel that everything they use is the best maintained code ever, it's the most secure code ever, and that's just it. Because if it's not, it's madness, right? Just the liability they have to their shareholders, because they're just grabbing garbage off the internet, and who knows what's in there. That's what we're doing. I mean, that is what we're doing. We're just grabbing whatever we find on the internet because it seems like it solves the problem we need. How many companies really have rigorous processes to review every line and make sure that the code is sound? Nobody, ever. And if you point out that there's a problem here, all they're going to hear is, yes, we agree with you. There's a problem with your code. So the solution is not to help you fix it. The solution is not to use your code. We'll use someone else's. So this experiment basically failed before it started because if we had this sustainability score, nobody will go to fix it. People will use it to boycott software that is putting a score anything other than 100 on their sustainability score because people want to assume, they have to assume for their sanity that everything is perfect. Now, this might not be a popular opinion, but my conclusion is that there is no sustainability problem in open source. 99% of developers doing open source are well-funded, have good jobs. They're not crying, and also, in order for you to feel that there is a fairness problem, you have to be really, really massively successful. So the percentage of people who are self-employed with extremely popular modules is very small. So a lot of the community conversation around sustainability is basically putting those very few people who tend to be very loud on Twitter complaining and making it the problem of everybody, and it's not. So I tweeted a couple months ago that there is no open source sustainability problem. There is a I want a better job problem. I don't want to have a boss problem. And the bottom line is that everything I'm doing around trying to make my work sustainable is really, I'm just being an entrepreneur. It's really just a startup. The bottom line is that you can't really make money doing open source. You can monetize around it. And if you think about it, the currency of open source is attention. You produce open source, and in return you get attention. And you can convert that attention to a better job. You can convert that attention to other opportunities. You can sell other products because you got attention to your free one. But the bottom line is that you can't sell open source because it's no longer going to be open source. And if you don't want to do open source, don't. It's not like, in coffee production where people are actually being taken advantage of and used, and they have no other choice, and they will starve to death if they don't take the bad plantation job that they're being offered. I'm not aware of that many successful open source maintainers who are starving. I don't think it's a real world problem, except for that one guy who is going to jail. So I understand that this is not a very satisfactory conclusion to this talk. I was promising you bringing a new era of fairness to open source, and I'm basically saying, hey, it's fair. It's all good. Don't worry about it. But you have your emotions and feelings. So I was like, how can I make the audience happy and leave this talk with a good feeling and not like, that guy was depressing. We're not going to use his code anymore. So I decided to commission a piece of art that every time you are working on open source or interacting with people or just dealing with assholes on Twitter, you can look at it and basically kind of like reflect on the nature of war and conflict and battle. And so I wanted a piece of art that will reflect what I call the open source battlefield. And one of my favorite battlefield kind of horror of war piece of art is Picasso's Guernica. So I worked with Chris Carrasco, who is my partner in crime, making all my artwork for all my presentation. And together we came up with this. So I give you the open source Guernica 2019. Thank you.